right? We'll wing it. We're good. Okay, so hi, I'm Carol Bryant, and I'm here with Steve of My Slim Doggy or slimdoggy.com, and we're having tech chat tonight. Steve, I'm going to let you give a little bit of an introduction to yourself for those who are unfamiliar, a little bit about your background, and basically if you've ever been afraid of tech, or if you have some questions about WordPress, doing the tech behind the scenes thing with your blog as pet bloggers, as bloggers in general, Steve's been my go-to guy, and he's been awesome. But Steve will be here this evening to answer questions and to help you be your own go-to person for things behind the scenes. So welcome, Steve, and if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Carol, for that introduction. Yeah, first of all, I'm afraid of tech, but I just don't show it very well. So yeah, I've been in the software business for 15 years. I founded a technology company about 12 years ago. And it was interesting. It was in media, and we sold software to major media companies like Forbes and Condé Nast and Rodale, and never realized that I would get into publishing myself. Started Slim Doggy about 2 years ago as a result of us adopting a fat, overweight, unadoptable lab. His name is Jack. And we started with building some software to help people figure out how much to feed their dog. And we ended up getting very seriously into the blogging business because we wanted to write about about food and fitness for pet owners, and for those who didn't have the app, we wanted to share what we've been learning.
Okay, awesome. And I know you've been such a great resource for me. And one of the things that's so intimidating to me is I'm on WordPress. And I'm always afraid if I'm going to touch something or add something to it or change something, I'm going to break my blog. Right. And a lot of bloggers love WordPress. I know a lot of folks listening to this live and in recording are WordPress fans. So are there any downsides to using WordPress, or at least using WordPress and not even having the proper knowledge?
Yeah, I think it's the knowledge is the key. It's a very powerful and relatively easy to use program. 2 years ago, I knew of it. I never used it before, and started to deep dive into it and realized how much amazing things you can do with it. There's a couple of problems though. Number one, it's an open source program. What that means is that anybody who has the inclination can open up the entire code base and see how it works. That lends itself to spammers and hackers, because they can see the code and they can figure out ways to infiltrate WordPress installations. So you got to be really careful. You got to be prepared for that, and we can talk about that later. The second thing is it's what I call a heavy program. It's got so much going on, and particularly if you use a lot of plugins, like no one I know, and it can actually cause your server, if the server is not sufficient, to slow down and sometimes even crash. So those are two things that you have to really kind of worry a little bit about, particularly if you're a serious blogger. If you're not a serious blogger and you do it once in a while, it's not a big deal. But if you really treat this like a serious thing, then you've got to be aware of these issues.
So should we have plugins at all if we're using WordPress?
You know what? Plugins are amazing. When I first stumbled upon them when we started with our WordPress site, literally there's a plugin for everything. It's like the old expression, there's an app for everything. Well, there's a plugin for everything. The problem is that a couple problems. One, if you use a lot of different plugins, you may expose yourself to conflicts between these plugins, and that can cause performance problems on your website loading. It can cause things not working the way you expect them at all. You could install a new plugin and your site could go down. Got to be careful with that. The second thing about plugins is that you have to be very diligent choosing which ones you use and keeping them up to date. And this goes back to the sort of the spammer hacking concept, because if you're not careful with it and you're using plugins that you know where they came from, or if they haven't been updated in a long period of time, they can be very susceptible to hacking and spamming infiltrations, which can cause you a lot of grief.
Okay, so while you're talking about that, I know one of the things, we hadn't discussed this earlier, but I hear folks say, should I go on WordPress.com or WordPress.org? And what does it matter? What's the difference? And if no one even knows what that means, if you could just give like an overview of that, and which is the better of the two.
Right. I think so. We use WordPress.org. Using .org essentially means that you're using your own version of the WordPress software You have complete control over the theme that you use, over the plugins that you might want to use, any kind of custom configurations you might want to do to make that your own site. If
Okay.
you go, if a good example is if you wanted to put some JavaScript code to run like a special widget or something, you can do that, no problem. If you go to WordPress.com, which by the way might be a simple solution for those bloggers that aren't fully into it yet,
Right.
then WordPress.com might be a way to go. It's a controlled environment,
Mm-hmm.
be a safer environment, but it doesn't give you at all the flexibility that you really need to push the envelope.
So .org is really for serious bloggers, those who are wanting to make a career out of it or are doing it so that they can work with brands, they can gain a following, all of the above. WordPress.org is more the way to go.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Okay, awesome. So, all right, that leads me into hosting, and this is something you and I have talked about before. I've switched hosts before. What does it mean, a hosting plan, for those who have no idea, and what should bloggers look for when they're picking a hosting plan?
Yeah, we could probably spend a couple hours on that alone, and I'm by no means an expert on it, but let me just give some perspective. So back in the day when the internet first came about in the late 90s, there was these companies that were valued at billions of dollars because they were providing web servers for companies who wanted to have websites, and you'd have to spend lots and lots of money to get a web server, which is a computer, to host your website. That's completely gone. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes a month, depending on what your company was.
Right.
Now, these hosting companies like HostGator and GoDaddy and Liquid Web, there's so many of them. They offer really easy to set up, very inexpensive plans that allow someone like you or me or a casual blogger even to come in, set up a website, get WordPress on it, install a few plugins, and get live literally within a day or two. Okay. The thing about hosting is that you get what you pay for. So I've seen plans where you can literally, as a blogger or even as a company, get a website hosting plan with WordPress for $2 or $3, $4 a month.
Okay.
Which is nothing. I mean, you can go to Starbucks and blow through that every morning.
Right. Right.
Here's a couple of things. If you're just starting, if you're not sure how much or how far you want to take your blogging efforts, that's a great way to start to get used to it. But there are some risks to it. Number one, you are not in control of who else is on that server. So what happens is it's a concept of a shared server.
Right.
What that means is that the hosting company, let's take GoDaddy as an example, and I am by no means picking on them. GoDaddy has a server that it's a computer machine that they have created, and their objective is to get the most amount of revenue from that one machine as possible. And the way to do that is to sign up as many customers on their hosting plans as possible.
Well, let me ask you this. Does that mean that's why sometimes there's this lag when I try to get on my blog? If I'm a blogger and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's so slow, I can't, my site's not loading. Is that part of that?
That could very well be part of it, yeah. And so not only do they load probably more customers onto a machine than they should, but you as your own blogger, you don't know what kind of customers those are. You could have some, really smart, maybe nefarious people on there taking advantage and hogging the resources, the computing resources of that machine, and you have no control over it. So you might be perfectly legitimate. You might have a very light WordPress site, very few pictures, and it turns out that because someone else is doing something on your server, your site won't load. There's no real answer to that. Like even if you interview the hosting providers about the problem or the question, they're not going to give you an honest answer. You can always request to move servers. Sometimes they'll let you do that. But it's just the idea of having a shared server is great because it's cheap, but it's not great because you don't know who else is on it and how many other folks are on it.
So how do I know that? How would I know if I'm a blogger? How would I know?
You really don't. You really don't. You can. Here's what you can do. You can upgrade your account. You can actually pay those companies more money to get more computing resources. That means more memory, more processing power, things like that. What we ended up doing, we ended up going from a pretty cheap program to a moderate program, and we ended up upgrading all the way to what they call as a virtual private server. or
A VPN.
VPS.
Mm-hmm.
It's VPS actually, not a VPN. And
Okay.
it's expensive, it really is, but it gives us much more control. Like we kind of know what's going on our machine. And
Okay.
I'm not suggesting that most bloggers should do that. We had
Uh-huh.
our reasons for doing that, but if you do want to have control, you have to pay for it. You get what you pay for.
Well, I'm going to go back to one of your favorite topics then. And most of us listening in on this, we want to do something more than just a hobby for our blog. It's something that it's a career move. It's our livelihood. It's something we're affecting pet parents. Plugins, I know that's your favorite topic. Then there's a plugin for everything. Okay, what is a plugin? What are some of the plugins that are out there? And how should I know if I should put that plugin on the back end of my blog?
Right. Okay. So if you go to WordPress.org, you can actually search in the plugins section for plugins doing certain things. Like one of
Okay.
my favorites is security,
Mm-hmm.
firewalls. You could use them. You can get plugins for backups. You can get plugins for formatting. Like if you don't know HTML very well, you can use these things. They're pretty cool. What I suggest to folks, there's a couple things or rules that I suggest. One, if you see a plugin that sounds really great, look at the statistics that WordPress provides. It will show
Okay.
you two really critical things: how many downloads, and
Mm-hmm.
you can also see how many downloads recently, and number two, when it was last updated by that developer.
Okay.
So without passing judgment on any plugins that are out there, if you see a plugin that only has, I don't know, a few thousand downloads over the last couple of years, it means that it's either in a very niche space and it does very certain things that few people don't need, or it means that it's not very good and it
Okay.
hasn't been well tested. The
Okay.
second the second thing is, if you see a plugin that hasn't been updated in a while, for me, I like to see plugins that have been updated within the past 6 months. Sometimes go back a year or so is okay as well. It depends on how popular the plugin is. But if you
Okay.
it hasn't been uploaded in a year, I recommend don't using it. Either find another one or bypass it altogether, because the plugins that get out of date are susceptible to these hackers and spammers from getting in somehow
Mm-hmm.
and wreaking havoc on your whole blogging experience. Now, WordPress itself, the WordPress program, gets
Mm-hmm.
updated throughout the year. We just had recently, like 2 weeks ago, a week ago, I think it was 4.1 or 4. I don't remember.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're always going to be updating it, and they're adding all these great features and even improved security enhancements and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
If, as they're doing that, and if the plugins are not being updated accordingly, you can get a lot of problems with compatibility. It could cause your site to break, etc. So if it hasn't been updated in a long time, don't run the risk of breaking your site, and don't run the risk of getting hacked or spammed just because you thought you really needed that plugin. One
So
last
if I'm on my site and I see on the back end that WordPress has a new version available, should I hurry up and go get it?
let's talk about that. So if you
Okay.
see a WordPress update, here's what I do. I usually wait a few days.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because I know it's a legitimate update and it's been well tested, but until they release it to the entire community, you never know. There might be a few bugs or issues, or heck, it could be some incompatibility with your particular setup, whether it's your plugins, maybe even your hosting provider, that
Mm-hmm.
could cause your site to break. So
Okay.
with the WordPress itself, I say wait maybe a
Okay.
week or so. With
Okay.
that said, very recently they did an amazing enhancement. Any security issue in the WordPress software is automatically updated. So you don't have to
Oh.
worry like, oh my goodness, if I don't update it, am I at risk to be hacked versus
Oh.
the way I was? You don't have to worry about that. With
Okay.
plugins, it's different. With plugins, I generally will update them as soon as I know that they're ready to be updated. And the way that you see it is in your dashboard. You see that little icon, and it tells you how many things need to be up to date.
So people should be paying attention to that if you are running plugins, to if there are updates on those particular plugins. That's not the kind of thing you want to fool around with and wait. You should actually go in and update your plugins, correct?
Right, pretty much right away. And
Okay.
Not all of the updates are around security issues,
Hmm.
but frequently they are. And what I mean by that is, again, these plugins generally are open source code hackers can get into. They can see how that code works and
Hmm.
figure out ways to exploit holes in the code to get into your site.
Yikes.
I
Yikes.
mean, there's so many instances of this. I mean, it's incredible. So I don't recommend that you wait. But here's the
Okay.
thing. Here's
Hmm.
one thing. So don't just go in there and just hit update because you never know. Something could break. There could be something incompatible with respect to those plugins, updates, and your current environment. So make sure you have a backup plan. And we can talk
Okay.
about backups, but make sure you have a backup plan. The recommended protocol is to do a backup before you update your plugins and WordPress.
Well, let me pause you there. I'm somebody that has no idea what that means, do a backup. A backup to my blog, a backup to my data, and we probably could spend a whole evening on that. But at the very least, A, where do I go to back something up? And B, what do I need to back up?
Yep. So let's talk about why you'd want to back something up first. How
Okay.
about that? Because
Mm-hmm.
I think we all take it for granted that the software is going to work, that
Mm-hmm.
everything's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't always, whether it's because you've been hacked, whether it's because you just have incompatibilities, whether it could be your hosting provider has a data center hiccup and
Mm-hmm.
loses your data. You never know. So
Right.
what a backup does is it basically takes a picture of your website and all the associated files and things like that that are in it, all your plugins, etc., and it stores it somewhere in a file that you can later bring back. Right? That's the beauty. If you lost something, if something went wrong, you don't have to start from scratch. You can start from the last backup. Maybe the backup is every day. So if something happened today, oh rats, I have to repost today's article, but I don't have to repost the last 3 years of articles.
Right.
Mission
Okay.
critical to do backups. One of the problems with cheap hosting plans, to go back to a question earlier, is sometimes they're not they're not providing you enough resources from a computing perspective to do a backup on demand. And that's
Okay.
a problem because now you have to take a risk that when you make these updates that nothing's going to go wrong, or else you're going to have to go to the last available backup. The best way to back up on your own WordPress installation, by the way, is through a plugin. So
Okay.
there are lots of backup plugins available. I use something called Backup Buddy. It's a
Mm-hmm.
paid plugin. There's another one called Updraft Plus
Okay.
that also is free that can give you some really good, easy backup processes.
Okay.
One last point about backups. I'm not getting technical, but when you do a backup, you can either back up the database, which is basically all the posts that you created and configurations.
Mm-hmm.
That's typically a very small file. It's very easy to do. Or you can do a full backup. A full backup tries to back up all the images, all the pictures, all the WordPress code, all the plugin code, all those kinds of things. Can be very large and take a little bit more time. So
Okay.
when in doubt, if you're going to do a backup before you do plugins, plugin updates or WordPress updates, just doing the database backup is usually sufficient and very quick.
Okay. We're going to take a couple questions from folks who are writing in and asking. And Tom wants to know, Steve, have you run across the hosted WordPress service from Copyblogger Media called Rainmaker? Do you
No,
know anything?
I have not heard of that one, but the idea of a hosted WordPress service is now becoming very popular. GoDaddy has one, uh,
Okay.
and they actually recently purchased a company that was supposedly very good in that space. The idea behind the hosted WordPress service is that you get the benefits of WordPress.org software, but the hosting company controls some of these issues that we're talking about. So when there's a new WordPress installation, they'll do it for you. They're not going
Okay.
to update your plugins, but they'll do things like that that make your job just a little bit easier for you than if you did it yourself.
And are there fees for that? Is that the kind of thing? Is that fee-based?
They wrap up the fees and your hosting costs in total. So depending on the program that you're on, it'll be probably a little bit more expensive than if you just run a regular server.
And Fido Treadster has written in, and she says that I use Updraft plus the free version for her WordPress backup. Is that something that you know about? Do you recommend Updraft Plus?
I absolutely do. Yes, that was one of the free ones that I mentioned.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I think it's a very good plugin. It's a little bit harder to work with. A few more steps that you need to use to get your backups done, but it's a very good program, and it will allow you to download the files locally on your computer. And also, if you're interested, you can send them out to a storage like a Dropbox or whatever, which I
Okay.
also recommend that you do from time to time because it keeps your data safe.
Okay, I really like having you as my tech man. I just thought I would tell you that because sometimes it's a lot for someone that's even like myself. I've been doing this for a while. One of the things I hear a lot is I just want to write. I don't want to have to worry about what I'm doing on the back end. Before we move on, I want to talk to you about getting hacked because that is so important, and I know many folks have been hacked. What are at the bare minimums? What should bloggers be doing on a regular basis to maintain the health of their blog on the back end?
Yeah, so I think first of all, it starts with preparation. Here's a tip, and you can follow this or not. Some of my Slim Doggy writers don't follow this tip, and I do it religiously. And that is, when I write a piece, I always write it in a word processor.
Okay.
So I have a copy of that content in an easily accessible and copyable file, no matter what happens to the site.
Right.
Um, when I'm done, I will just grab that text, copy it into the WordPress post, and off I go. So that's like my first line of defense, just in case. By the way, if I ever want to write a book, I've got a nice way to grab all that content, and it's
That's
there.
very smart. So that's number one is to definitely have your content, write it in a word processor. I've been bitten by that myself where I'm doing it live on the back end and something happens or the dog has to go out and I come back and where did my content go? So you're right. That's a really good tip that if someone wants to then do an ebook or they're working on something and they want to be able to share that out, you have that backup. So backup is key. Writing it in a word processor. You talked about backup in general. You talked about updating the plugins. What about preventing hacking? You tell me that WordPress sites are hacked daily. You mentioned to me in the past Apple even gets hacked. And can you talk a little bit about hacking and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's so the WordPress tool is vulnerable, of course, but it's not like it's you're not likely to get hacked, but everyone gets hacked. I mean, Apple got hacked, right?
Right.
So what you do is you will end up doing your backups on a regular basis. That's the first and most important thing, because if something happens, then you can relatively easily recreate your website. The second thing that you should do is you need to put on your site a security and or firewall plugin that will protect you from incoming hack attempts. The
Okay.
simplest example I have is all WordPress sites have the same login page. So the hackers know they can go to fidos.com / exactly where to go to get into your login screen. And then
Mm-hmm.
they can sit there and they can just keep trying usernames and passwords. And it's a really simple example and it's really easy to fix, but you can use these plugins, these security plugins, to limit the number of times that you can attempt a username or password combination. Heck, you can even hide the location of that page so that the hackers don't know where it is.
So
Things like
then in other words, if I were to do myslimdoggy.com / WP minus admin, you're just ripe for hackers to come and play with you. Is this
Because if
right?
they, yes, because if they can get to that page, they can go and start trying to just basically they have computers that go in and do random username and password combinations until they get in. And the
Right.
computer can go fast and it can keep doing it. So, but that in itself can cause your site to crash. Just the sheer
Wow.
volume of WordPress requests.
Well, Yvonne wanted me to ask you, doesn't WordPress test things on the back end, the plugins and that sort of thing to make sure that they're safe? Isn't that on WordPress's shoulders, or do we need to be extra due diligent on our part as the blogger?
Yeah, it's actually not on their end. It's an open source community, as I said. They actually don't take responsibility for any of the plugins unless it was written by the parent company of WordPress Automatic.
Okay.
Everything else is all done by the community. So they have no
Hmm.
warranties. What they do is provide the forums for people to share experiences. So if you wanted to search, hey, is there a plugin or a security vulnerability for a particular plugin, you can go to their WordPress site and search for that and see if there's any known issues. But they do not
Wow.
take responsibility. Heck, even for the new releases of WordPress that happen, they test it as best they can with their community, but you never know, stuff happens. And so there's been cases where they'd have to do a very quick follow-up release because issues have been found that they did not find.
So two things. First, we have a guest here, Rough Talk, who's in our chat tonight, and she's thanking you for the great tips on plugins and mentions the website wpbeginner.com for articles and the best plugins for your WordPress site. Have you heard of wpbeginner.com, Steve?
I have not heard of that one. There are many sites out there that give you tips. The one thing I'd say about those sites is you have to make sure they don't have an ulterior motive.
Mm-hmm.
If you
Mm-hmm.
do a search on like best WordPress plugins, sometimes the results will come back by a company that's offering plugins.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's like the fox guarding the hen house to some extent. So,
Right.
but
Right.
Rough Talk is right. There are resources out there that if you want to, you can spend some time to learn about these issues.
Okay. One of the things, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left, and in our final moments, what I wanted to talk about that I had a problem with recently, I wasn't paying attention to file size of my images, and a lot of us are very image heavy in our blog posts. We want to see things these days as well as read the content. What should bloggers be doing to make sure that their images aren't going to slow their website time, aren't too big, and can you speak to that briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that many of the folks in the audience have similar questions or issues. Here's what we do. We do a couple things. One, we pre-process all of our photos. What we do is we will load them up into a tool like a PicMonkey or Pixlr editor and try to make them smaller. You can do that very simply by playing with some of those tools. So maybe instead of you have a 500 kilobyte file, you can get it down to 70, something like
Okay.
that.
Okay.
The, the other thing that we'll do, and by the way, a lot of times it's related to the actual physical width and height of the image. So if you don't have to have a huge image, then try not to use it. Try to shrink it
Hmm.
down, maybe 400 by 250 or something like that. You'll save a lot of space right there. The second thing that we do is we use a plugin that does an image compression when you load it into the WordPress software, and that can actually work pretty well. It can save a lot of
What's the plugin? What can you Can you talk about that plug? Can you just at least mention the plugin?
Yeah, there's a few. The one I'm using is relatively new. It's called Prism, Prizm.
Hmm.
There's a couple of others that are very well known as well. I can't recall the name off the top of my head, but if you do a search on image optimization or image
Okay.
reduction, you'll see a whole list.
Well, what I'm going to do also, as we are in our final minute or two, is I'm definitely going to interview you off of the chat because there's so many topics we didn't even get a chance to touch on. We probably could have spent a few hours tonight talking about tech. One of our final questions, Amiable Cats, wants to know, does WordPress have a honeypot available like Drupal does? I hope I said all of that right.
Yeah, it's Drupal. I don't know. In fact, I don't know what a honeypot is. I've
Okay,
never,
I know Winnie the Pooh and a honeypot, but
yeah,
I don't know what a honey.
I've never used that terminology before. Can Amiable Cats put that on the screen?
Yeah, what we'll have to do is find that out and do that as a follow-up question. And when we're doing on blogpods.com, I'll make sure you and I talk, and we'll really get into some more tech. One of the things I wanted to make sure you get out there is we have 1 minute left. If you can tell folks how to get in touch with you, where to find out more, and I hope we'd see you at BlogPaws in Nashville next year too.
Yeah, I mean, so slimdoggy.com is the website, slimdoggy.com. You can always contact us through the contact forms on our website, which are plugin forms. Um,
Okay.
but info@slimdoggy.com is an email address if you ever had any questions. The truth of the matter is that my business is pets and is blogging and is software for pet owners.
Okay.
The tech side of it is just trying to use my experience and what I've learned over the years and now in WordPress to help other
Right.
folks, just get through some of these basics. Set yourself up to succeed. It's worth a few minutes to get prepared, set these processes up, and trust me, because if you don't do it and something goes wrong, you're going to be really, really upset about it. And you're going to waste a lot of time
Absolutely.
and a lot of money.
Absolutely, that's really important. So for everybody who's listening, please make sure you're maintaining your back end of your blog. I want to thank Steve for joining us. I'm a little bit under the weather tonight, so excuse my voice. And we'll definitely see you at BlogPaws Nashville and look forward to following up with you on blogpaws.com.
Okay, thanks a lot, Carol.
All right, and if anybody else has questions, we'll also be able to talk in chat after the session. So if you're listening to this and you're on, put your questions in for Steve, and he'll stick around, and I'll be here for a little bit as well on Google.